Welcome to the Mind Myself podcast. I'm Esther, and it is my pleasure to be bringing you information about healthcare approaches, health issues, and people's health journey stories, all from the complementary, holistic, and integrative perspectives, helping you become your own best health advocate and helping you make your own informed choices because you matter. Welcome to the Mind Myself podcast, Conversations with E. I'm Esther, founder and CEO of Mind Myself, and it is my pleasure to welcome our guest today, Mo or Maureen Elworthy. Welcome, Mo.
Thanks, Esther. I'm happy to be here with you.
So glad to have you back. You've done a few things with us, and always a pleasure to talk to you. So, Mo, before we dive into the conversation about what is a death doula and a day in the life, tell us a little bit about you, your background, and how you came to this work.
Sure. So I am a certified coach and a death doula, as you know, and a mental health professional working a lot in grief and loss. I started my career working on a suicide intervention hotline, so a crisis line. And that got me very curious about humans and helping people through challenging moments of crisis, or through conversations they didn't know who to have those conversations with. So I've worked a lot in the shadow spaces, and I guess naturally a curiosity opened up around death and grief, which I've been following for a number of years now.
Amazing. And I don't think it's something that many people think about going into or spend time educating themselves about. So this is such a valuable conversation that we're going to have. And how long have you been doing this for, this kind of work?
Yeah. So I've been working in grief and loss for 5 years. And working in mental health since 2006. So supporting people frontline through crisis since 2006. And I agree. It's definitely not a conversation that everyone wants to have or feels comfortable having. And I think that's kind of why I got interested and rolled up my sleeves, as I was that person in my family who was really curious to have conversations that people were shying away from. And I noticed that that's common in the experience of being human. We're sometimes pushing away from the things that make us uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And it's inevitable for all of us. And we so often don't want to talk about it. So this is, I'm very interested to see how this conversation unfolds. Mo, what is a death doula? Tell us right off the bat.
Yeah, it's a good question. And honestly, it's a term I haven't always been familiar with. I knew about doulas and midwives from a young age, but not the idea of having a doula at the other end of life. And the word doula actually comes from the Greek word for female servant. And that kind of embodies the sense of a doula is here to serve the client, to support and serve in whatever is needed. I like the word companion or guide. And so being a death doula means that I'm companioning people through issues around death or end of life. So I think about facilitating the journey when someone gets sick, supporting people emotionally, sometimes practically, and also spiritually as they navigate the anticipated death of a loved one, their own life-limiting illness, or the recent death or unexpected death of someone in their lives.
That's a really clear explanation of what it is. And someone might say, well, I understand what a doula for birth is for, because, there's this whole process. Why are death doulas needed or valuable? I mean, it's clearly a time when emotions are fraught and it's a difficult time, but it's not been a very common practice in the West.
Yes.
So why are death doulas needed?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think part of it is what you said, hasn't always been a practice in the West. And when you say that, I think, yes, and it has been a practice in other parts of the world. We live in an interesting time where our culture kind of is pulling away from death in general, and we don't all have cultural or family histories and practices around death care and being with people as they're dying. Often we put old folks in a home, and we're not involved in the day-to-day process of death and dying. And some cultures still have a very strong connection to death and the process of tending to a loved one as they are transitioning out of this world, or afterwards caring for the body. But not all of us do. And so we are seeing a movement right now where we are stepping a bit aside away from that medicalization of death and trying to bring it more into the human realm. Um, what do families want at this time? How can we be more of a community, be a village around somebody as they are approaching their own death or the death of someone else? And there are also some really practical reasons why a doula might be needed, such as our aging population. Changes in hospice criteria means not everyone have access to hospice, even if they would like to go and be supported by that system outside of their home. And death doulas or other death care workers can help fill that gap between the system and beds that we have available, and still provide a personalized service to somebody where they have care, professional care, alongside the emotional or the personal care that they have with their people or their family or their loved ones.
Right. And who would you typically serve? Tell us a few, perhaps even a story or two without revealing confidence about the
Mhm.
kinds of people and maybe certain age ranges, ethnic groups, whatever
Yeah.
that are common for you.
Yeah, that's a I'm happy to share, and I will disclaimer, of course, say that my experience is not representative of all doulas because um, I'm a registered doula with the Canadian Association, the End of Life Doula Association of Canada, and with Death Doula International, which means that my face and name and bio is up on at least two websites where people can find me in a directory. And my experience in those spaces is often we look for somebody who is reflective of ourselves. So, in that way, I am white, I am a cisgender female, and I would identify as a caregiver. And so, I do support a lot of people who identify as caregivers themselves. So, people in their 40s or 50s who are looking after an aging parent who is, and they see an anticipated death on the horizon. So they often call me in for that emotional support, having the support of nurses alongside. I've had a lot of people say, I'm so overwhelmed with the day to day care of supporting my mother on her journey that I haven't really stopped to pause and think about what is important for me on this journey. So in the stories I'm thinking of right now, I spend a lot of time talking to those clients about their relationship with that person and working on legacy projects or having conversations to prepare them to have final conversations with the parent that they just need a little bit of guidance around, or support to feel that those conversations are valid and that your experience as a guide or a caregiver is valid here too, and you might have needs as a caregiver alongside the needs of the person who's dying. I also, given my experience, so another bucket of people I support, given my experience in suicide intervention and crisis, I am called in quite often around traumatic loss or unexpected end of life. So after a death, I have had an yeah, a large portion of my clients call me in, many different ages and genders and backgrounds, but knowing that I have experience with traumatic loss, they would like support around grieving, around caring for the body of the deceased, and having conversations with extended family around that death and what that means for people, and helping people process and create legacy after the fact. So that is, I would say, the second large group of people that I support.
And this is so interesting. And if people haven't even heard of a death doula before, how would they know to find you? I know that we're having this podcast on the Mind Myself website, and in the notes, there will be definitely places where people can find you specifically. But how would people know where to find a death doula? Is it a matter of course that counselors or nurses recommend you, or how does that work?
That's a great question. And oh, so many different streams that people could find themselves in, right? In conversation, I can say this year I've had many more people say, "Oh yeah, I know about a death doula because," than when I started this work. So the term is becoming more and more prevalent, but definitely connections through other services. So some hospice workers or palliative care nurses will recommend you might want to work with a doula right now. Um, I've been referred by veterinarians when someone's pet dies. I counselors as well, as you said, some not all counselors are comfortable in the deep dive of grief, and so they might provide that care. Other agencies as well sometimes connect to the End of Life Doula Association, and so often that referral would go to the directory, and then someone might find me that way. But it is definitely, as you're saying, maybe more of a word of mouth. It's a niche, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how would you say being a death doula is different from somebody getting counseling? You mentioned counselors, and maybe they don't go into such a deep dive of grief. Is that the primary difference, or how would you describe it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there are definitely grief counselors who focus on grief and are very skilled and comfortable having these conversations. I would say as a doula, we have a bit more flexibility in how we show up for somebody. So being a doula, it's an unregulated profession. So I have responsibilities to the End of Life Doula Association because I'm registered under their banner. And so there are limits to the services I can and can't provide. For example, doulas, we don't do any physical care. We don't do any touch care on a body, but I have spent some clients who I spend a lot of time with physically in their hospice space. So that might look like vigiling, sitting in meditation with someone, reading their prayers from their book of preference, creating vigils and ceremony and rituals with the family members as well. So that's another difference is I often serve a family unit or a group of people, not just one individual, whereas a counselor would be bound by confidentiality to support one person and there'd be a conflict of interest. I'm very clear about confidentiality and what I hold between a group and between individuals. And I'm able to serve a number of people in the system, um, walking alongside with them. So it's very creative being a doula. Some of my work is done virtually in conversation and some of it's in person, some of it's in group. We also can do those practical pieces like advanced care planning with folks, um, those education pieces as well. And that's another way people find me, I should say, actually, is hosting events in community. I host a lot of deaf cafes and conversations in community centers and coffee shops, and people often find me in those avenues and because they're curious to talk more about death. Um, yeah.
Death cafes. I've heard of that recently, and the first time I heard it, I went, "What's that?" And now it's getting people familiar with these conversations and making it actually come to the forefront instead of hiding and running away from it.
Yeah, exactly. And the Death Cafe is a cool structure in that it has specific rules. Like there's no agenda, there's no teaching, it's not a lecture. It is a facilitated event. So I might bring some prompting questions or a topic, but the group itself decides where they want to take the conversation. So you don't have to come in with any expectations, all different belief systems and places in life and journeys are very welcome there. And it's an open space for, like you said, curious minds to gather and approach the fact that we are mortals and counter that death denying culture that many of us find ourselves in on the day to day.
How would you work with somebody who comes to you who's maybe a caregiver for somebody who is absolutely fighting against death, which is very common, and the caregiver knows it's imminent and the person is just absolutely not facing it and confronting it? How would you work with a situation like that?
Mm-hmm. Uh, um, One of the people I've learned a lot from is named Janny Brown. She's works in cancer care and is a social worker and grief counselor. And I can and think of um, an anecdote that she shares that's almost this exact situation. And I think there's a place for radical honesty, and then of course we always have to accept where the other person is at. And many people do approach death in denial. And so sometimes that's a self-protective mechanism. Sometimes it's to protect the people around them. Of course, we often find ourselves being hopeful as humans. And so, I would explore, of course, with the client, what is most important for them at this time. And in that situation, the the caregiver might be my client. I'm often hired by the caregiver.
Yeah.
So what does she need? Here you are alongside the bed of this person who is in complete denial. What do you need here for your own closure? Knowing we can't change another person. How can you get your wishes across, or um, completion for yourself given the state that is? And, ask a lot of prompting questions to her around what could what could help shift for her. And then if the person who's dying, well, in this case, I don't think that they would be my client because my title has death involved, and so they might not be interested in talking to me at all. But that is a situation that happens, of course. Or two family members, two children of somebody. One is very clear that dad's going to recover, and the other one is very clear dad is on a palliative journey. And so, supporting people to come together despite the differences we have, and be honest about how we're feeling and what we need right now, knowing also the death journey is unfolding. It often does not unfold in the ways or on the timeline that we expect.
Hmm. What's one of the most beautiful parts of the work that you do?
Seeing the love that people have for one another, seeing people share things that they didn't feel comfortable sharing before, or release things that they weren't able to let go of before. Just some beautiful, very vulnerable conversations as someone is approaching death, and getting very honest about what really matters. So I've seen a lot of love where there was conflict before,
Hmm.
and people coming to their own acceptance of death. Sometimes before that death, sometimes it's many months after, but helping people come to a place of peace or more ease, even in the face of grief, and seeing people return to happiness somehow. I've seen a lot of people who have been in the depths of pain and grief, and seeing them find little ways to care for themselves day in, day out, to get to a place where they are able to live alongside the grief is I find it very humbling and very rewarding.
Wow, those are some very beautiful things that you shared, Mo.
Mm.
Appreciate that very much. And as we come to almost the end of our conversation here, what do you wish people would know about end of life or think about for end of life?
Hmm. I think what I would say is, um, expect the unexpected. I think we often have a picture of how things will unfold, and if we can learn a lot about the dying process and what signs mean what, and um, there is still a lot of unknown and uncertainty, and I would say a bit of magic in the process, where sometimes, I've seen people who the nurses say he's going to die within days, and it might be several months before he passes. And I've seen some moments of clear, lucid thinking and connection after someone has been unresponsive for, again, months. So being being open to that, and on the flip side, sometimes death happens very rapidly, and so again, expect the unexpected. If you might have a 6-month diagnosis, but say what you need to say now. Don't wait. If there's
Mm,
a conversation you want to have, or an embrace that needs to be given, do it today. And I think I would share that with every human,
mm,
find some way. This would be my advice or offer, invitation to all humans, is to find some way to connect with the fact that we're mortal,
mhm,
whether that's reflecting on the life of an ancestor or someone who has passed, or visiting a cemetery, or thinking about some facet of, oh, what song would I want played at my celebration of life, or would I want a celebration, and where would I like to rest? And yeah, maybe have a conversation at a death cafe or start your own advanced care planning, but do something to acknowledge today that we're mortal because life is precious. And I think the more contact we have with that fact, the more we are able to live in to life as it is.
Right. I've heard someone say in the past, if you know the end of your death, which most of us don't, some of
Mhm.
us do, but most of us don't. If we knew it, maybe we would live differently and we would be more present and taking those moments and connecting more. Perhaps that's perhaps that's one of the messages to take away. And what would you like to leave people with today, Mo? What's your final thought for us?
Mm, that that death is a part of the life experience and that life is very much present in the death experience too. And so
Mhm.
I would just invite people, yeah, to lean into that discomfort a little bit in whatever way feels comfortable for them today. There are so many wonderful books. Maybe I'll give you a couple to include in your podcast notes.
For sure.
But yeah, I love the writing of Francis Weller, and he says, I might not quote exactly, but he says that we are most alive at the threshold between loss and revelation.
Mm.
And there is that pairing for me around aliveness and loss. And yeah, Francis Weller, really wonderful, wise soul.
Thank you. We'll be sure to include those in the notes accompanying this podcast. Thank you so much, Mo. What a rich and heartwarming and authentic conversation. Thank you for the work you do and for being here with us.
Thanks, Esther. It's always a joy to connect with you.
Thank you. And we do this because you matter. Thank you for being with us at the Mind Myself podcast today. We know that time is precious and you've spent some of your valuable time with us. We're grateful. If you would like to reach out to our guest directly, the information is below. And if you would like more from Mind Myself, that information is also below. Please visit our website and check out all the information about the different complementary, holistic, and integrative healthcare approaches, information about health issues, more podcasts, tons of blogs, and we even have a community page for you where you could reach out and tell your story safely, or you could ask questions, and perhaps somebody else in the world is going through something similar to you. In any case, we're so glad you're with us, and we're doing this because you matter.